Welcome to our channel, everyone. In our heartwarming story, a humble young man from Virginia saves a California girl from drowning, only to discover she's the daughter of a wealthy tycoon. In the end, after countless trials, they pledge their lives to each other in a moving beachside wedding that unites two vastly different worlds. Wondering how fate led them to that incredible moment? Stick around and listen to the entire tale to find out all the twists and turns. If you enjoy uplifting romances and stories about hope in unexpected places, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more moving stories. Also, feel free to comment with your thoughts, predictions, and where you prefer to tune in, because we love hearing from you, and your insights guide what we share next. Ethan Reynolds wiped a bead of sweat from his brow as he finished storing the last of the rental paddleboards in the weathered wooden shed by the shore. The late afternoon sun glimmered over the rolling waves, turning the ocean's surface into a dazzling patchwork of gold. Even though the day was winding down, a few determined tourists still lounged on the sand or splashed about in the shallows, eager to make the most of the dwindling light. For a poor Virginia guy like Ethan, this beach was both a haven and a workplace. Raised just a short walk from the water's edge, he'd grown up learning to navigate boats, tackle strong currents, and soothe anxious visitors who sometimes forgot how powerful the ocean could be. He never minded the labor. In fact, he felt at home out here. The air, redolent with the tang of salt and sunscreen, reminded him of simpler times before adult responsibilities had weighed so heavily on his shoulders. After stacking the paddles, Ethan was about to call it a day. Maybe reward himself with a quick swim and a cold soda from the convenience store down the street. His muscles ached in that satisfying way that comes from honest work, and he looked forward to the first relaxed moment he'd had all week. Yet just as he turned to head back toward the tiny rental kiosk, his world shifted in an instant. A piercing scream cut through the hum of playful chatter along the shore. His heart lurched at the sound, and he glanced over to see a small crowd forming near the water's edge. People were pointing frantically out to sea, their faces etched with growing fear. "Someone's drowning! Call for help!" a woman shouted, her voice tight with panic. Ethan's adrenaline surged and he sprinted across the soft sand without a second thought. His feet pounded into the wet shoreline as he tossed aside his t-shirt, his mind laser-focused on the frantic figure flailing in the water. The waves weren't huge, but the currents along this stretch of beach could be treacherous, especially for someone unfamiliar with the ocean's hidden undertows. He recognized the signs of someone caught in a rip current, the frantic arms, the desperate gasps for air that vanished every time a new wave rolled in. Without hesitation, he plunged into the surf. The ocean's chill struck him like a slap, but he barely registered it. The only thing he could think about was the California girl who seemed to be losing her strength with each passing second. Gritting his teeth, Ethan employed the swimming skills he'd honed since childhood to push toward her, slicing through the resistance of the relentless current. "Hold on," he shouted, though he knew his words likely fell victim to the roar of the crashing waves. When he finally reached her, he realized just how much trouble she was in. Her dark hair clung to her face, and her eyes were wide with terror. She tried to speak, but only a choking cough emerged. The next wave hit them, nearly wrenching her from his grasp. Her survival instinct kicked in, and she began to flail, almost dragging them both under. Managing to wrap an arm around her waist, Ethan forced himself to stay calm. "Stop fighting me," he commanded in the same authoritative tone he used to calm panicked swimmers at the dock. Her struggles subsided just enough for him to begin the arduous journey back to the shore. The current was unrelenting, tugging them further out, but Ethan knew these waters. He angled his strokes diagonally to escape the worst of the rip current, using every ounce of strength to keep the girl's head above the surface. Time seemed to distort. He couldn't tell if he'd been swimming for seconds or minutes. At last, his feet brushed the sandy ocean floor, and with one final surge, he pulled her into the shallows. The crowd that had gathered parted to give them space. Ethan gently lowered the girl onto the sand, noticing how unnaturally pale her face appeared. Her lips had a faint blue tinge, and she didn't seem to be breathing. Fear clutched his heart, but he refused to surrender to panic. Ignoring his own exhaustion, Ethan tilted her head back and started CPR. His hands pressed down on her chest in a steady rhythm, silently praying that she would respond. "Breathe," he muttered under his breath, his voice tight with urgency. It felt like time froze, and the bystanders seemed to hold their collective breath. Then at last she coughed, expelling water before drawing in a ragged breath. A surge of relief flooded through Ethan as she opened her eyes, gazing up at him in a daze. The paramedics, arriving just in time, quickly stepped in to administer oxygen and check her vitals. But before they whisked her away, the girl turned her gaze to Ethan, her dark brown eyes full of something he couldn't quite place. Was it gratitude, shock, or maybe both? All he knew was that in the space of a heartbeat, life for this poor Virginia guy would change in ways he could never have imagined. 2 hours later, Ethan found himself sitting in a small, stuffy examination room, the fluorescent lights buzzing in the quiet. His damp clothes clung uncomfortably to his skin, but he'd been too worried to leave. The local clinic was the nearest medical facility, and it wasn't much. Just a converted house with a few patient rooms, some basic medical equipment, and a handful of exhausted nurses who worked around the clock. Ethan had no official reason to remain after the paramedics took the girl away, but he couldn't bring himself to simply walk off. Something in her wide, terrified eyes had tethered him to her, compelling him to make sure she was all right. He stood to stretch just as a nurse poked her head into the hallway. "You can see her now," she said, motioning for Ethan to follow. With a knot of worry still coiled in his stomach, he stepped into the tiny room where the girl lay, propped up against a pillow. She looked fragile under the harsh light, her tanned skin contrasting with the stark whiteness of the sheets. But there was life in her eyes again. Tired, cautious life. As he approached, she stirred and turned her head. Recognition flickered across her features. For a moment, neither spoke. A gentle beep from the heart monitor broke the silence, announcing the unsteady rhythm of her pulse. Ethan cleared his throat, resisting the urge to fill the air with nervous chatter. "Hey," he began softly, trying not to startle her. "How are you feeling?" Her lips parted in a faint smile. "Better," she rasped. You saved me." Ethan shrugged, unaccustomed to praise for doing what he considered basic human decency. "I guess I was in the right place at the right time." She took a shaky breath, wincing a little as she shifted position. "I'm Harper," she said. "Harper Reyes." He nodded. "Ethan Reynolds. It's good to meet you, Harper, though maybe not under these circumstances." A spark of humor lit her eyes. "I've never drowned before. It's not the best way to break the ice." She paused, her expression turning serious. "Thank you for everything." Ethan felt heat creep up his neck. "Don't worry about it. I've done rescues before, but I'm just glad you're okay." He noted how her hair, now half dry, framed her face, and how her voice softened whenever she looked his way. The moment felt more intimate than any conversation he'd had in a while. Curiosity danced in her gaze. "You've done rescues before? Are you a lifeguard?" He shook his head. "Not officially. I work at the rental shop on the beach. Boats, kayaks, paddleboards, that kind of thing. Grew up around the water, so I guess I know what I'm doing." Something in his humility made her smile. "Well, you're good at it, and I owe you my life." When he started to object, she raised a hand. "I'm serious. You could have died out there too, you know." He swallowed, looking away. "It's part of what I do," he said, though the words didn't quite encompass the rush of fear and determination he'd felt upon seeing her struggle against the waves. "I just reacted." They fell silent for a moment, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Then Harper shifted in bed, wincing again. "My dad," she began, only to pause as though she had to gather courage. "He's Malcolm Reyes from Reyes Developments in Los Angeles. He's been wanting me to join him on a family trip out here, but I came a little earlier than he did. Guess I wanted to soak up the beach." Ethan had heard of Reyes Developments. The name rang a bell, even in small-town Virginia. It was a company rumored to be worth billions, with upscale properties all over California. Realizing that this California girl was apparently a millionaire's daughter, Ethan forced a neutral expression. Money had never impressed him. Hard work did. "Well, all the more reason to be careful out in these waters," he said gently, not wanting her to sense any discomfort he might feel about her wealth. "Yeah," she admitted, rubbing the back of her neck, which sported a faint bruise from the rescue ordeal. "The nurse said I'll be discharged tonight if everything looks good." Dad's arranged for a private doctor to check on me, but I want to stay here a bit. She met Ethan's eyes. I feel safer with you around. Her words, so vulnerable and candid, caught him off guard. He gave a small nod. Sure, I can stick around, he replied, wondering if his voice sounded as shaky to her as it did in his own ears. And so, in the span of a single day, Ethan Reynolds, just a simple, hard-working, poor Virginia guy, found himself keeping vigil at the bedside of a California girl who, by an extraordinary twist of fate, was the daughter of a self-made millionaire. He had no clue what kind of doors this chance encounter might open, but a stirring in his heart hinted that this was only the beginning of a story neither of them could have anticipated. 3 days later, the storm that had been brewing over the Atlantic finally rolled in, battering the coastline with gusty winds and sheets of rain. Tourists who had been leisurely tanning under the sun now scurried to souvenir shops or sought refuge in the few beachside cafes. For Ethan, bad weather meant a lull in business at the boat rental hut. He took advantage of the downtime to secure the vessels and ensure they wouldn't be knocked about by high waves. As he fastened the last rowboat to the dock with an extra rope, he spotted Harper weaving her way toward him, clutching a large umbrella. "Hey!" she called out, her voice nearly drowned by the howling wind. "You still out here in this weather?" He flashed a quick smile. "Somebody's got to make sure these boats don't float off to sea." He motioned for her to come under the small shelter of the boathouse's overhang, where at least they could avoid the stinging rain. Her cheeks were flushed from the wind and her dark hair whipped around her face. Even so, Ethan couldn't help but notice she was smiling more freely now, her post-accident pallor gone. Since that day at the clinic, Harper had insisted on bringing him lunch at work, making conversation about everything from local folklore to how different Virginia's beaches were compared to those back in California. He still felt a bit dazed by her sudden presence in his life. People like Harper usually didn't hang around people like him, not out of cruelty, but out of sheer difference in worlds. Yet here she was, looking him over with genuine curiosity. "I wanted to ask if you'd show me the ropes," she said, gesturing around the small harbor where boats bobbed on the choppy water. "If I'm going to spend more time in Virginia, I should probably know a thing or two about how to keep from drowning." Her light joke hung in the air between them, and Ethan managed a soft chuckle. "All right," he agreed, rubbing his hands together to dispel the chill. "But maybe we pick a calmer day for actual practice. You won't learn much in a storm except how not to get knocked overboard." Despite the weather, Harper appeared determined. "Maybe tomorrow, if it clears up. I'm heading to the local grocery store in a bit. You want anything?" The offer was small, but it signified a care that Ethan wasn't used to receiving, at least not from someone so far removed from his day-to-day life. He felt a gentle warmth spread through him. "I appreciate it, but I'm good," he replied. "Besides, I'll be done here soon. I was planning to pick up some extra shifts at the diner once I'm finished." Her expression shifted to mild surprise. "You work there too?" Ethan shrugged. "Gotta pay the bills. My family's house is a bit of a money pit, plus my mom's medical stuff isn't cheap. I'll do pretty much any odd job I can find around town." Harper glanced at him with an unguarded softness that made his cheeks burn. "I'd love to help," she began, but Ethan shook his head before she could finish. "You don't owe me anything," he interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "I'm glad you're okay, that's all." She studied him for a moment, as though trying to decode his deeper feelings. "I know I don't owe you," she said carefully, lowering her gaze to the wet sandy boards underfoot. "But maybe I could still do something, not out of obligation, but because I want to." Ethan hesitated. He disliked the idea of becoming a charity project, but he couldn't deny a part of him enjoyed her company. And yes, maybe even the attention. "We can talk about that later," he offered as a compromise. "I promise I'll try to keep an open mind." Just then, lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a loud rumble of thunder. Harper jumped slightly and Ethan instinctively put a comforting hand on her shoulder. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. The poor Virginia guy who spent his days fixing boats, and the California girl who'd grown up in a realm of privilege. The connection that sparked between them felt oddly natural, like something that had been waiting just beneath the surface, ready to bloom if given half a chance. True to Ethan's predictions, the storm eased up overnight, leaving the beach glistening under a cloudless sky by mid-morning. The sand, freshly soaked by rain, held fewer footprints than usual, as many visitors were still waiting for the temperature to climb before venturing outside. Ethan decided it was an ideal time for Harper's first lesson out on the water. No crowds, calmer waves, and plenty of space for mistakes without an audience. He unlocked one of the smaller motorboats and waved her aboard, his grin breaking out at the look of excitement on her face. They puttered away from the shore at a slow pace, the engine's soft hum mingling with the calls of distant gulls. Harper perched on the seat next to him, her posture stiff, but her eyes danced with anticipation. Ethan showed her how to check the fuel, read the wind, and steer with gentle adjustments. She was a quick study, asking thoughtful questions and listening intently to each tip he offered. As the boat glided across the water, they left the beach behind, heading toward a quieter cove where the waves were little more than ripples. When Ethan killed the engine, silence settled around them. Just the soft lapping of water against the hull and the mild whisper of a breeze. Harper stared out at the endless stretch of water, her features reflecting a quiet awe. "This is so different from everything back home," she murmured. "I mean, I'm from Los Angeles, and I practically grew up on the coast, but it always felt crowded, chaotic. Out here, it's like the ocean finally has room to breathe." "I've never been to California," Ethan admitted, kicking off his worn sneakers and letting his bare feet dangle over the side. "All I know is this piece of the Atlantic, the local diner, and the daily grind of small-town life." She leaned back, letting the sun warm her face. "I envy you in some ways. My life has always been overshadowed by big city ambitions, huge investments, and my dad's never-ending projects. He's proud of what he's built. Reyes Developments is his baby. But sometimes I wonder if there's room left for me to figure out what I really want." Ethan picked up on the note of longing in her voice. "You said you came here early, before your dad, right? Maybe that's a start. You're taking the time to learn about a place and about yourself. That has to count for something." She looked down at the boat's metal railing, tracing its edge with her fingertip. "I hope so. Meeting you feels different. I'm not used to someone who doesn't automatically tiptoe around me because of my last name." A self-conscious laugh escaped her. "I mean, it's strange to admit, but sometimes people treat me like I'm an extension of my dad's bank account or a stepping stone for their own careers." Ethan frowned. "That's messed up. You're a person, Harper, not a bargaining chip." Her lips curved into a grateful smile. "Exactly. And you actually see me." She paused, her voice softening. "It's hard to explain, but when you pulled me out of the water that day, I felt more than just relief. It was like my soul latched onto the fact that here was someone real, someone honest." A wave of warmth washed over him. He hadn't anticipated the impact she'd have on him either. "I'm just a boat rental guy," he said, a tinge of irony in his tone. "You're also the reason I'm still breathing," she teased lightly, but her gaze held sincerity. "Don't undervalue that." They spoke for what felt like hours, the boat bobbing gently as the sun climbed higher. At some point, Ethan decided to let her steer again, showing her how to start the engine and maneuver around patches of seaweed. She laughed whenever she overcompensated on the throttle, sending a spray of water over the hull, and he found himself laughing too, a carefree sound he hadn't made in a while. By the time they returned to shore, it was midday, and a smattering of beachgoers had emerged. Ethan helped Harper tie up the boat, and as they walked along the dock, their shoulders brushed. It was a small, intimate connection, but it made Ethan's heart flutter with an unexpected sense of belonging. Little did either of them know, this quiet morning of shared confidences and laughter was about to be overshadowed by a stark reminder of just how different their worlds really were. Ethan's world fell apart on a sweltering afternoon just a week later. He'd finished a long shift, hauling kayaks for tourists who had no clue how to handle them in the surf, and was about to lock up the rental hut when his phone buzzed. Fishing it out of his pocket, he saw his sister Avery's name flash on the screen. Her voice trembled with panic as soon as he answered. Their mother, who had been quietly battling heart issues for months, had collapsed at home. An ambulance was en route. "Ethan," Avery managed between shaky breaths, "they're taking her to the hospital. You have to get there now." Dropping the padlock and letting the chain rattle to the ground, Ethan sprinted to his beat-up truck. Every stop sign on the short drive to the medical center felt like a cruel delay, By the time he rushed into the ER waiting room, his heart pounded with a mix of dread and residual adrenaline. Avery, looking pale as a ghost, met him by the entrance. Without speaking, she led him to a curtained-off bay where their mother lay, eyes closed, an oxygen mask strapped to her face. A doctor approached, charts in hand. "She's stable for now, but her condition is serious," he explained. "She'll need ongoing cardiac care, medications, regular checkups, possibly surgery down the line." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He knew they were behind on bills and that her condition was worsening, but he hadn't realized it was this severe. He found himself nodding numbly, forcing out words of thanks to the doctor, before sinking into a plastic chair by her bedside. Over the next several days, he tried to juggle everything: visits to his mother, covering extra hours at work to pay mounting medical expenses, and reassuring Avery that everything would be all right. The nights blurred into early mornings, and he was running on coffee, frayed nerves, and sheer determination. The tension at home was palpable. The pile of envelopes stamped "Final Notice" weighed heavily on the dining room table, demanding attention he couldn't afford to give. And then came yet another blow. Glenn, the owner of the boat rental shop, called Ethan into his makeshift office, a cramped space stacked with old life jackets and faded brochures. "Listen, Ethan, I hate to do this," Glenn began, his thick eyebrows furrowed. "But business has been slow, and we've got new investors who want to upgrade, bring in a more professional staff." The older man looked genuinely remorseful. "They're talking uniforms, advanced certifications, higher insurance coverage. It's out of my hands." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You're saying I'm fired?" Glenn sighed. "They're not calling it that. They're calling it restructuring. But yeah, effectively, your position is gone." He reached out, placing a weathered hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I wish I could keep you on, kid. You've been the best worker here." Ethan could only nod, swallowing the lump in his throat. Losing this job meant losing the one steady income that had kept his family's fragile finances from toppling completely. He felt the walls closing in. With medical bills piling up and no viable options for immediate employment, he had no idea how to stave off disaster. Harper tried reaching him during this time, sending texts and voicemails. He'd responded politely, but his replies were short, reflecting the weight on his mind. He didn't want her to witness his life in crisis mode. It felt like yet another gulf between them, a reminder that she could likely solve these problems with a single phone call, while he was drowning in them, no lifeline in sight. Yet despite the grimness of his situation, Ethan clung to a thread of hope. He had fought against the ocean's current to save Harper. Maybe he could fight this too. He had no idea how, but he tried to trust that somehow a path would present itself. It had to. His mother's health and the very roof over their heads depended on it. A week later, Ethan sat on his front porch, the wood creaking under his weight. The little house in Virginia, once so full of life, now wore an air of defeated silence. Paint peeled from the clapboards. The roof was in desperate need of repair. A final notice for foreclosure lay crumpled on the porch rail, mocking him every time he glanced its way. He stared at the horizon, lost in thought. His mom dozed inside, her medication leaving her too exhausted to do much more than rest. Avery was working extra shifts at the local grocery store to help, but the numbers simply didn't add up. They needed more income, fast, or the bank would take the house. Then in the dying light of day, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. It was so out of place in this modest neighborhood that Ethan was momentarily stunned into inaction. The passenger door opened, and Harper Reyes emerged, her face reflecting a mixture of resolve and empathy. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, but she stood with a poise that spoke of her privileged upbringing. Ethan rose slowly, fighting a wave of shame and anger. He hadn't wanted her to see him like this, jobless, on the brink of losing his family home. "Harper," he said stiffly, stepping down from the porch. She took a hesitant step forward. "I'm sorry to just show up like this, but I heard..." He cut her off, hating the bitterness in his voice. "You heard what? That I'm on the verge of foreclosure? That I can't pay the medical bills? Which part did you hear?" Her eyes shone with understanding, not pity. "All of it, Ethan," she admitted softly. "I tried calling. You wouldn't tell me anything. so I looked into it. I'm sorry if that feels like an invasion of privacy. I couldn't sit back and do nothing. His shoulders sagged. The fight in him drained away almost as quickly as it had flared. I can handle it, he muttered, even though he wasn't sure he believed it. Harper stepped closer, her voice steady. You saved my life. Let me at least try to help you save yours. He stiffened, ready to rebuff her again, but she raised a folder she'd been clutching. I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a job. That threw him off. A job? Her posture straightened, as though she were emulating her father's businesslike air. Yes, I've been working on a philanthropic venture in California, building homes for families who can't afford housing. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time. And now I'm finally in a position where I have the budget and my dad's reluctant blessing to make it real. It's called the Reyes Community Build Initiative. I'm hiring project managers and skilled hands, people who actually know how to build, fix, and coordinate. Ethan glanced at the folder, then back at her. But I'm not an architect or anything. You don't have to be, she replied earnestly. You know how to work with your hands, manage teams, solve practical problems. I've seen you fix boats, keep people safe, and do a dozen odd jobs. That's exactly the type of person I need. Someone who can oversee crews, teach volunteers the basics of repairs, ensure quality control. And it pays well. Sakudo. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. The idea of leaving Virginia to go to California, of uprooting what little stability remained in his life, was overwhelming. Yet the possibility of saving his family's home and giving his mom the care she needed was too compelling to ignore. Harper, she cut him off gently. It's a real opportunity, Ethan. I'm not here to wave money in your face. I'm here because I believe in you. And because I can't just stand by while the person who saved my life loses everything. For a long moment, he studied her expression, searching for any sign of pity or hidden agenda. All he found was sincerity. He nodded slowly, heart pounding. I'll need to figure out what to do about my mom and sister. She gave a slight smile, relief shining in her eyes. We can arrange for better care for your mom, and Avery can come with you if she wants. There are plenty of job opportunities in LA. Ethan exhaled, feeling the crushing weight of desperation lift just a fraction. If this is for real, then I'm in. A slow grin spread across Harper's face, more radiant than any he'd seen before. I promise you won't regret it. Standing there on the porch, with the sun sinking into the western sky and the threat of foreclosure still looming, Ethan could hardly believe this turn of events. It seemed surreal, like a second rescue, this time from the undertow of financial ruin. And in that moment, he began to wonder if fate had brought this California girl into his life, not just so he could save her, but so she could save him too. Ethan's head spun as he stepped off the plane at Los Angeles International Airport. The sheer size of the city, as seen from the window, had been staggering. Endless grids of streets, skyscrapers glinting under the blazing sun, and a coastline that seemed both familiar and foreign. Holding his duffel bag, he navigated the bustling terminal, feeling a surge of both excitement and anxiety. Harper had arranged for them to ride together to the construction site where he'd be assisting. Their plan was straightforward. Ethan would help coordinate the volunteer efforts, oversee the practical aspects of building affordable homes, and learn the ropes of large-scale project management. A car waited for them outside the terminal, and Ethan quickly realized it was one of the Reyes family's luxury SUVs. The driver, a polite older gentleman, offered a greeting and whisked their luggage into the trunk. Sliding into the back seat, Ethan found Harper already there, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. "Ready for this?" she asked, her voice carrying a tinge of anticipation. He smiled back, though his stomach churned. "As ready as I'll ever be." In truth, he felt like a fish out of water, but he was determined not to let her see his nerves. Their first stop was a modest but lively construction site in a lower-income neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The smell of fresh lumber and sawdust floated through the air, and teams of workers in hard hats bustled about, hammering nails, mixing concrete, and erecting frames for new homes. Even though it was worlds apart from the small coastal projects he was used to, Ethan felt a sense of familiarity in the collective effort. the camaraderie that came from building something meaningful. Malcolm Reyes, Harper's father, arrived soon after. Tall and imposing, with silver streaks in his dark hair, he strode onto the site like a seasoned general surveying his troops. He assessed Ethan with cool detachment at first, as though measuring him against an unspoken standard. "So," Malcolm said, voice clipped, "you're the one Harper convinced me to hire." Ethan met the man's gaze steadily. "I guess I am, sir. I won't let you down." Malcolm's expression was hard to read. For a long moment he said nothing, then extended his hand. "I hope not. We're investing a lot into this project, and Harper vouches for you." Shaking his hand, Ethan noticed the man's grip was firm, but not hostile. "I appreciate the opportunity. I just want to help build homes for people who need them." Something flickered in Malcolm's eyes. Perhaps approval, perhaps curiosity. Then he nodded brusquely and moved on to speak with the site manager. Harper exhaled, tension melting from her shoulders. "He's usually worse when it comes to newcomers," she whispered conspiratorially. "I think you did fine." Over the next few weeks, Ethan threw himself into the job. He arrived early to coordinate building supplies, organize volunteer schedules, and stayed late to plan the next day's tasks. Though physically exhausting, the work gave him a renewed sense of purpose. His hands, once used to handling boat oars and fishing lines, now learned to wield power tools and manage lumber deliveries. He found a certain pride in seeing frames go up and roofs take shape where there had once been nothing but cracked pavement or empty lots. Harper often visited, clad in jeans and a t-shirt, sometimes picking up a nail gun or helping him stack plywood. Their relationship deepened with each conversation stolen between tasks. She brought out a side of him that was hopeful and less guarded, and he offered her a taste of simplicity that she'd craved. Whenever they locked eyes, it felt like a silent affirmation that fate had woven them together in ways neither could have predicted. One night, after a particularly long day, they ended up sharing Chinese takeout on the tailgate of a pickup truck, the city lights twinkling in the distance. "This place is a far cry from your beach back home," Harper mused, passing him a carton of orange chicken. Ethan nodded, gazing at the distant skyline. "It is, but maybe that's okay. I like knowing I'm doing something important here, that I'm not just existing day to day." A gentle smile curved her lips. "I think we both needed a change." She moved closer, their shoulders brushing. "And I'm really glad you're here." He could have kissed her then. He wanted to, but a sudden self-consciousness made him hesitate. Instead, he bumped her shoulder affectionately. "I'm glad too." In that soft, glimmering moment under the urban stars, Ethan allowed himself to believe that life could be better than the hand he'd been dealt. Neither of them realized that, even with all the progress they'd made, their journey was just beginning. There were deeper forces in play, family expectations, personal anxieties, and the looming question of whether their connection could withstand the inevitable challenges of mixing two vastly different worlds. Life began to settle into a rhythm that Ethan never dreamed would be his. Mornings were filled with the clamor of construction work, the whirring of drills, and the camaraderie of co-workers who were gradually becoming friends. In the evenings, he'd often visit his mother, now receiving better medical care thanks to Harper's guidance in navigating insurance options and specialist referrals. Avery, meanwhile, had found a part-time position in the project's administrative office, eager to help with paperwork and logistics. The family that once stood on the brink of losing everything now felt the stirrings of genuine hope. But it wasn't just about earning a paycheck or securing a safer future. Every time Ethan handed over the keys to a completed home, seeing a grateful family cross the threshold into a place that was truly theirs, he felt a surge of pride that dwarfed any prior accomplishment. In those moments, he understood what Harper meant about finding purpose beyond one's own struggles. The Reyes Community Build Initiative was more than a job. It was a chance to rewrite destinies, including his own. Over time, Malcolm Reyes, still reserved and exacting, couldn't ignore Ethan's dedication. He'd appear on site with quiet observations, pointing out safety concerns or praising efficient problem-solving. One evening, after a successful ribbon-cutting ceremony, he approached Ethan. "You're making progress," he remarked, scanning the completed houses. "I'll admit you've exceeded my initial assumptions." "That means a lot coming from you, sir," Ethan replied, attempting to contain his grin. He'd never sought the older man's approval for its own sake, but it felt validating nonetheless, especially for a poor Virginia guy who'd once believed wealth and power were the keys to a kingdom where he'd never be welcome. Things reached a turning point one night on a quiet Malibu beach, far from the bustling construction sites and the city's glow. Harper had invited Ethan there for a brief escape from their hectic schedules. They walked along the shoreline, barefoot, letting the frothy waves nibble at their toes. Moonlight shimmered on the water, creating a path of silver that stretched to the horizon. The sense of déjà vu was strong. It reminded them both of the day she nearly drowned. Except now, they walked in step as equals, partners. Harper paused, glancing at the ring she'd bought months ago on a whim. It wasn't a flashy diamond, just a simple silver band she liked. I used to wonder if I'd ever find something or someone that felt genuine, she murmured, her voice nearly lost in the sound of the rolling surf. With you, I don't have to wonder. Ethan reached for her hand, his heart pounding. He'd been planning this moment for weeks, trying to find the right time, the right words. But it turned out the perfect moment was simply when it felt right. Dropping to one knee on the damp sand, he met her gaze. Harper Reyes, he began, voice trembling with emotion. I might not have fancy titles or a family empire, but I have a heart that's yours, if you'll have it. Her breath hitched, tears glimmering in her eyes as he pulled a small shell ring from his pocket. It was handcrafted back in Virginia, a piece of the beach they both loved. Will you marry me? He asked, the moonlight catching the reflection of hope in his own eyes. Harper's answer was a whisper that managed to be louder than the crashing waves. Yes. She threw her arms around him, laughter mingling with tears of joy as the tides swept around their ankles. In that instant, the distance between their two worlds disappeared, replaced by the unshakable bond of love and the promise of a shared future. Their wedding took place months later under a softly glowing sky, right on a California beach. Chairs draped in white stood on golden sand, the vow exchange accompanied by the distant lullaby of ocean waves. Family, new friends, and even a few of Ethan's old neighbors from Virginia watched with smiles and tissues as the couple promised a lifetime of devotion. Malcolm Reyes gave away his daughter with moist eyes and a respectful nod to Ethan, while Avery stood beaming with pride as Ethan's best woman. Photographers captured every tender moment, from the first kiss as husband and wife to the gentle laughter that spread through the crowd when the couple headed for the water, determined to take a symbolic barefoot stroll along the surf. In the ensuing months, Ethan and Harper expanded the Reyes Community Build initiative, bringing their cause not just to other parts of Los Angeles, but also back to the very edges of the Virginia coastline. The local towns that once knew Ethan merely as a handy dock worker began to see him as a visionary who understood their needs. Someone who could empathize with the struggle of living paycheck to paycheck, all the while craving stability and a future worth building. People from divergent backgrounds united under the initiative, with Harper bridging the gap between philanthropic muscle and grassroots support. By the time they celebrated their first wedding anniversary, they'd helped dozens of families secure homes. Yet perhaps their greatest triumph was the sense of unity they fostered between two drastically different worlds. The poor Virginia guy and the California girl who was a millionaire's daughter didn't just rescue each other from literal and figurative drowning. They created a ripple effect of hope that transcended state lines and class divisions. And so, Ethan and Harper's story stands as a testament to the power of compassion, resilience, and unwavering faith in the goodness of people. It all began with a near tragedy on a beach, but it blossomed into a grand tale of love, second chances, and the profound realization that when two hearts find each other, no wave or distance can keep them apart. If you found inspiration in their journey, remember to share this story of hope and perseverance. Because sometimes the simplest acts of kindness can spark the most transformative outcomes, and sometimes the most unlikely encounters are the ones that lead us exactly where we need to be. Not long after they'd stabilized operations in California, Harper surprised Ethan with a proposal of her own, taking the Reyes Community Build initiative back to Virginia. They both knew how desperately his hometown needed safe, affordable housing. Although Ethan initially worried about how locals would react, excitement soon replaced his apprehension. After all, This was a chance to give back to the place that had shaped him, and to show Harper the other side of his life. When they arrived, they were greeted by familiar faces who had witnessed Ethan's struggles firsthand. A mixture of pride and relief rippled through the community as new construction teams broke ground where dilapidated homes once stood. Under Harper's guidance, volunteer efforts flourished, and each successful project reminded them why they'd started this journey. In quiet moments, Ethan would steal a glance at Harper, her hands calloused from labor, her cheeks flushed with fulfillment, and realize he'd found his true partner. Together, they were changing lives, including their own. Welcome to our channel. In our uplifting tale, the most dramatic turning point comes when Sasha is wrongly accused of leaking vital information, and she must race against time with Remy to prove her innocence. If you're eager to find out how these high-stakes twists conclude and whether justice finally prevails, be sure to follow the entire story right to its remarkable ending. We invite you to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring narratives and share your thoughts in the comments below, letting us know where you're listening from. Late-night rain in Clifton Heights was never kind to anyone, but the relentless downpour this particular evening felt especially punishing. Blurred headlights streaked across the slick streets, and neon signs buzzed as they struggled against the unyielding cascade. In the heart of this dreary neighborhood, a modest diner stood out, its warm glow and flickering red sign promising comfort, or at least a small reprieve from the storm. Through the fogged windows of that modest eatery, Sasha Greenwood was wiping down tables after the last of the regulars had finally left. She had rich mahogany skin and tired eyes that hinted at her daily marathon of double shifts. Yet even exhaustion could not dim the soft spark of kindness that illuminated her face. She often told herself that while tips might be scarce, human compassion never had to be. It was nearly closing time, and the staff was running on fumes. The cook had left an hour earlier, and the busboy was mopping floors in the back. Sasha was about to close up when she caught sight of someone outside the diner. A small silhouette hunched over in a wheelchair, half covered by a frayed blanket. Alarm shot through her. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and in that flash of lightning, she saw him more clearly. A boy with dark, damp hair plastered to his forehead, face pallid with cold. She paused, her cleaning rag in hand, heart thudding with concern. As the exterior neon sign buzzed erratically, she realized he was trembling. There was no way, she thought, that she would lock up and leave him out there. Setting the rag aside, Sasha pushed through the front door. The moment she stepped outside, the icy wind lashed at her, soaking through her clothes. Water seeped into her slip-resistant work shoes, reminding her just how few resources she had at her disposal. But none of that mattered, because the look in the boy's eyes told her everything she needed to know. He was alone, and he was frightened. She crouched by the wheelchair, arms shaking from the cold but voice steady with concern. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, soft but firm. "What are you doing out here all by yourself? It's too cold for you to be waiting in this weather." The boy's eyes darted uncertainly. He hesitated, clutching that threadbare blanket as if it were a lifeline. Finally, he mustered a quiet reply. "I'm waiting for my dad," he managed, glancing at the empty street. "He said he'd come back." The forlorn note in his voice tugged at Sasha's heart. She scanned the deserted sidewalk, illuminated only by a lone street lamp and the flicker of a pawn shop's neon sign across the road. Not a soul was in sight. "All right," she said, keeping her tone as soothing as she could. "But I can't let you stay out here in the rain like this. That's not safe. Come inside with me for a bit, okay?" She offered a gentle smile, pushing the wheelchair toward the door. The boy didn't resist. In fact, he looked more relieved than anything else. Within seconds, the dull roar of the storm was replaced by the diner's comforting warmth. Unbeknownst to Sasha, someone was watching from across the street. A sleek black luxury sedan sat idling in the shadows. The figure inside it had been observing her every move. His name was Remy Delacroix, a powerful billionaire whose commanding presence in corporate boardrooms had made him both revered and feared. And in the back of his mind, he kept replaying one fact. That small boy was Theo Delacroix, his son. Remy was late because of a high-stakes phone call with international investors, and he had told Theo to wait by the diner's entrance. Yet even as he concluded his final words to the people on the other end of his mobile, he'd seen Sasha's compassionate act, an act that would set into motion a chain of events neither Sasha nor Remy could have anticipated. Inside the diner, Sasha was already busy prepping a meal. She knew in her gut that a warm sandwich and hot soup could do more than nourish the body. They also had a knack for restoring a shred of dignity and security. As she set a plate of golden grilled cheese and a bowl of steaming tomato soup in front of the trembling boy, she said gently, "It's on the house. Promise." She introduced herself too. "I'm Sasha Greenwood. And you?" The boy looked at her with wide eyes, as if unsure whether he could trust her kindness. Then tentatively, he replied, "I'm Theo." And for the first time in that rain-soaked night, a flicker of hope softened Theo's anxious features. While Theo began to eat, Sasha discreetly watched him, wanting to make sure he felt safe. She could see the tension gradually leaving his small frame, his shoulders relaxing beneath that thin blanket. Outside, the rain's relentless drumming against the diner's windows provided an oddly reassuring soundtrack to their late-night encounter. The diner's fluorescent lighting illuminated the boy's pale cheeks. As he chewed on the grilled cheese sandwich, Sasha noticed his cheeks turning pinker, a small sign that warmth was returning to him. For Sasha, it was second nature to offer kindness whenever she could. She had grown up in a hard neighborhood, where every small gesture of goodwill might be the difference between hope and despair. Her mother, who had passed away only a few years prior, used to say, "Kindness doesn't come with a price tag, Sasha. You never know who needs it the most." Those words guided Sasha's every action, from the way she greeted gruff customers to the way she extended support to anyone who seemed down on their luck. Doing the right thing was a habit she clung to, even when her own financial struggles loomed over her every day. Across the street, Remy Delacroix lowered his cell phone. The conversation with his investors finally concluded. He was a man known for his steely resolve and an intellect that had built an empire spanning tech startups, real estate, and venture capital. At 48, he carried himself with a certain calculated precision, believing that sentiment was a distraction he could ill afford. Ever since his divorce and Theo's diagnosis, Remy had grown even more guarded. He had learned to rely on strategy and control, rarely letting others glimpse what lay beneath that polished facade. But tonight, something about Sasha's simple act of caring, it startled him, pricking at a corner of his heart that he'd left dormant for too long. Remy tapped a button on the car's armrest, lowering the tinted window a fraction, just enough to see inside the diner. He watched Sasha bend to wipe tomato soup from Theo's chin, her smile as warm as the neon lights were cold. An unsettled feeling stirred in him. Was this truly an act of altruism, or was there some ulterior motive? In his world, everyone had motives, often guided by ambition, greed, or desperation. Could it be different this time? He dialed his trusted assistant, Naomi Shepard. She had worked with him for years, becoming something of a shadow at Holt Delacroix Enterprises, anticipating his moves and facilitating his every demand. When she answered, he spoke in a low, clipped tone. "Naomi, I need you at the Clifton Heights Diner in 20 minutes. Dressed down, no corporate airs, and I want details on the waitress who just fed Theo." A brief silence lingered on the line. Then Naomi replied, "Understood," before he ended the call. Inside the diner, Sasha continued to keep Theo engaged in conversation, hoping to distract him from whatever anxieties he was grappling with. She learned that he was about 10 years old, bright but reserved, and that he used a wheelchair due to complications from a spinal condition. His father, Theo said, was supposed to pick him up soon, though the boy didn't specify what was keeping him. Sasha didn't press. She just made sure he was warm, full, and not scared. She offered him an extra blanket from the diner's back closet, a relic she sometimes used on her own lunch breaks when the place got too drafty. In those moments, Sasha felt protective, almost maternal. She worried about the absent father, uncertain whether he was truly on the way or had abandoned his child. Looking at Theo's thin jacket and scuffed wheelchair, she couldn't help but wonder about the boy's circumstances. Was he neglected, or was his father simply delayed by forces beyond his control? She hoped for the latter. Experience, however, had taught her to prepare for the worst. As she watched Theo polish off the final crust of grilled cheese, a wave of relief swept over her. At least he had eaten something warm and safe tonight. She bent down to pick up the plate, resisting a wince of pain in her tired feet. She forced a small laugh. "Feel better now?" Theo nodded shyly, the hint of a smile lighting up his face. For just a heartbeat, The clatter of raindrops outside seemed almost peaceful, a reminder that sometimes solace could be found even in the harshest conditions. The respite, however, was fleeting. Within minutes, the diner's front door swung open. A gust of cold air rushed in as a woman stepped through, water dripping from the hood of her worn jacket. She scanned the room quickly, her gaze landing on Theo. Sasha's pulse quickened. The newcomer radiated an air of cool efficiency, the kind Sasha recognized in certain customers, especially those who could switch from polite to intimidating in a split second. "Hi there, little man," the woman said, her voice oddly cheerful but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. "Ready to head out?" She glanced at Sasha with a tight smile. "I'm Naomi, a friend of Theo's father." Theo studied Naomi with a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. Sasha noted that he neither smiled nor seemed excited. "Dad sent you?" Theo asked, fiddling nervously with the edge of his blanket. Naomi nodded, placing one hand on the wheelchair's handle. Sasha felt an immediate need to intervene. Something about Naomi's manner reminded her of the countless times she had seen children handed off without any real warmth or reassurance. She turned to Theo, her voice gentle. "Is this someone you know well? Are you all right with leaving now?" Theo gave a small shrug, eyes darting between Sasha and Naomi. "I guess," he said, voice trembling just enough to betray some uncertainty. His father had said to wait, so presumably the woman was legitimate. But Sasha's instincts wouldn't let the matter rest. She angled herself slightly, blocking Naomi's path. "Mind telling me a bit more about who you are?" Sasha asked, trying to keep her tone polite. Her question caused Naomi's lips to tense, though her smile remained. "I'm just following Mr. Delacroix's instructions," Naomi said calmly. "He's waiting across the street." She gestured vaguely in the direction of the luxury sedan. "He's had some urgent matters to handle, so he asked me to fetch Theo." Sasha glanced toward the street but saw only the ceaseless rain and the faint glow of headlights. Something about the vague explanation made her uneasy. Still, she recognized the precarious position she was in. She was merely a waitress, and interfering too aggressively might land her in trouble. She also knew the unfortunate reality. A black woman challenging a stranger's intentions could escalate quickly, especially when that stranger carried an air of wealth or power. Still, Sasha couldn't relinquish her concern. She dropped to one knee beside Theo, meeting his gaze. "Will you promise me something?" she asked softly. "If you ever need help, if you're ever alone out there, you come back to this diner. I'll be here." Theo's eyes locked on hers. He gave a small nod. The tension in his face lessened just a bit, like he drew strength from her words. Naomi cleared her throat. "We should get going now. Mr. Delacroix is waiting, and Theo needs to be home." Without further protest, she maneuvered the wheelchair around Sasha, guiding Theo toward the door. The bell above the entrance jingled, its tinny sound swallowed by the roar of the storm. Watching them go, Sasha felt a tightening in her chest, an inexplicable foreboding. Theo looked back at her once before disappearing into the rain. In the short time she'd known him, Sasha had glimpsed the vulnerability in his eyes. Something about this entire situation felt off-kilter, like a puzzle with a few missing pieces. Maybe it was just her overactive imagination born out of caution. Or maybe she was seeing the first hints of a deeper story about to unfold. Just as the door swung shut, Sasha caught sight of the silhouette waiting under the faint glow of the diner's sign. The tall figure lingered near the black sedan, carefully overseeing Naomi and Theo's departure. He wore a dark coat that looked too refined for this rundown neighborhood. Although Sasha only glimpsed his face for a moment, she memorized its severe lines, chiseled features, and intense expression. Then the car door opened, and the figure slipped inside, leaving nothing behind but the faint hum of an engine and the pounding of rain. Sasha tried to shake off the unsettled feeling as she locked up for the night, but something about the entire encounter clung to her thoughts like a lingering echo. She made her way home, a cramped studio apartment in a peeling brick building that had seen better days. With her soaked sneakers squelching against the worn floorboards, she flipped on the single overhead light, revealing a sparse interior. A thrift store couch, a small television, and a kitchen area barely big enough for one person to stand in. Still, it was hers, a place she fought hard to keep. After drying off, she reheated some leftover pasta, but found herself too distracted to enjoy it. She couldn't stop replaying the events at the diner. Theo's uncertain smile, Naomi's stoic demeanor, and the distant, watchful figure by the sedan. The next morning would mean another day of hustle, a few hours of rest, then back to the diner for an early shift. But even her exhaustion couldn't quell the insistent tug in her mind that told her something was amiss. Just as she lay down on her lumpy mattress, hugging a pillow that had lost most of its fluff, there was a firm knock at her door. Her heart hammered in her chest. No one visited at this hour unless it was a neighbor complaining about noise or someone pushing flyers for a local campaign. Another knock, more insistent this time. She hesitated before padding over, resting an eye against the peephole. What she saw made her breath catch. It was the tall man from outside the diner, the one who had been standing beside the sedan. For a moment she considered not answering, but his posture, rigid, purposeful, suggested that he wouldn't leave easily. Slowly she turned the deadbolt and opened the door a crack. "Who are you?" she asked, heart thudding. "Remy Delacroix," came the reply. His tone was clipped, polite in a controlled, distant sort of way. "I'm Theo's father." Sasha's mind raced. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but it wasn't this. A billionaire rumored to wield enormous influence in the business sector, standing outside her minuscule apartment. His expensive coat was still damp from the rain. Something about him radiated both power and restraint, like he was a man who rarely wasted words or actions. "I wanted to thank you," Remy continued, as though reading her thoughts, "for helping Theo last night." Sasha noted the slightest shift in his expression, a fleeting vulnerability. She opened the door another inch but blocked the threshold with her body. "Thank me?" she echoed. "That's not necessary." He was cold and alone. "I just did what anyone would do." Ustatum, a brief pause followed, charged with the tension of unspoken truths. "Not everyone would," Remy said quietly, glancing at the worn carpet in the hallway. "I've seen plenty of people look away." His gaze returned to her, leveled and intense. "So yes, I want to thank you." Sasha gripped the edge of the door. She could almost feel the electricity of his presence. "All right," she said softly. "Thanks accepted. But how did you find out where I live?" "Let's just say I have resources," he replied. The words lingered uncomfortably, reminding her of the gulf between them. He was a billionaire capable of accessing information with ease, while she struggled to pay rent on a tiny apartment. "I'd like to offer you something," Remy continued. "I'm sure the diner doesn't pay much. I can make sure you never worry about money again." Her grip on the door tightened as indignation flared. "You think I helped your son because I wanted a payday?" She snapped, her voice slightly raised despite the risk of waking her neighbors. "I'm not for sale." Remy blinked, the faintest frown forming. "No, I'm not suggesting that, but I do believe in debts. In my world, every kindness has a cost, and I prefer to pay my debts promptly." He reached into his coat and extracted a slim envelope, placing it on the narrow shelf beside her door. "This is an offer. Consider it carefully." She stared at the envelope, suspicion warring with curiosity. Pride bristled in her chest, but a flicker of possibility surfaced too. What would it mean to have financial stability for the first time in her life? Before she could frame a response, Remy gave her a slight nod. "Thank you again for what you did," he repeated, then turned and strode down the hallway. Sleep eluded Sasha that night. The envelope sat on her small kitchen table like a forbidden secret. By morning, she caved to temptation and opened it. Expecting a check, she was startled instead by an official-looking document emblazoned with a corporate emblem, Delacroix Innovations. The text outlined a job offer, one so generous it made her eyes widen. There was a 6-figure salary, health benefits, even a line about potential bonuses. She sat there groggy and uncomprehending, scanning the pages over and over as her pulse throbbed in her ears. Could this be some sort of elaborate trick? She had only just met Theo, and Remy himself had barely exchanged a handful of words with her. Yet the language in the offer was formal, detailing that she'd be working with Remy directly in a specialized role that combined public relations and personal assistance, particularly as it related to philanthropic events for disabled children. The letter practically glowed with possibilities, and it contained the heavy weight of a life-altering chance. She nearly cried, feeling an overwhelming mixture of gratitude, confusion, and skepticism. Was she being toyed with? Or perhaps set up to fail in a world she knew nothing about? The more she considered it, the more her heart pounded, with a wild mix of excitement and fear. Eventually, she crammed the papers back into the envelope, showered, and headed to the diner, uncertain whether she'd respond or simply rip the documents to shreds. At the diner, her coworker Pam noticed her jittery hands and faraway look. "You all right, hon?" Pam asked, peering at Sasha over the counter. "You look like you're in the middle of a life crisis." Pam was older, with silver-streaked hair and a commanding presence that kept rowdy customers in check. Sasha let out a trembling exhale. "I might be," she admitted, then showed Pam the job offer. Pam's eyes bugged out. "This is real?" Pam whispered, her voice tense with awe. Sasha nodded, explaining the events of the night before, about Theo, and then Remy's unexpected appearance. Pam was silent for a moment before she whistled under her breath. "Sasha, this is... wow. You help a random kid and end up with a six-figure deal? It sounds like a fairy tale, but be careful. There's a saying that what seems too good to be true usually is." Her words echoed Sasha's own doubts. All day between orders and cleaning, Sasha felt the envelope burning a hole in her bag. At closing time, she made an impulsive decision. If this was a hoax or some twisted game, she needed to face it head-on. She left the diner and took a bus to the address listed on the letterhead, the towering Delacroix Innovations building in the city's posh financial district. The difference between the diner's gritty atmosphere and Delacroix Innovations' gleaming lobby could not have been more jarring. Polished marble floors reflected overhead chandeliers. People in tailored suits strode with purpose, rarely breaking stride. Sasha, dressed in her diner uniform, drew more than a few raised eyebrows from receptionists and security guards. Swallowing her insecurities, she approached the front desk. "I'm here to see Remy Delacroix," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The receptionist, a poised woman with perfect lipstick, gave Sasha a quick once-over before replying. "Do you have an appointment?" Sasha waved the envelope. "He offered me this job." To her surprise, the receptionist blinked, typed a quick message, and then frowned at her screen. A moment later, the phone at her desk rang. The receptionist answered, listened, and then regarded Sasha with newfound caution. "Someone will be here shortly to escort you," she said, her tone guarded. Sasha waited in the grand lobby, trying not to gawk at the sumptuous surroundings or the huge glass windows overlooking the skyline. She felt like an alien in a world of wealth. Shortly thereafter, Naomi Shepard emerged from an elevator bank, her stride rapid. She reached Sasha with a perfunctory smile. "Right this way," she said, guiding her through a corridor adorned with sleek artwork and muted gray walls. A hush enveloped them, punctuated by the faint hum of modern climate control systems. Naomi led her into a large corner office with sweeping views of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across two walls, capturing the sunlight that had finally emerged after the previous night's storm. Behind an imposing mahogany desk sat Remy Delacroix. Remy stood as they entered, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit. The contrast between Sasha's rumpled diner uniform and his polished attire was impossible to ignore. Yet when he spoke, his tone was measured. "Ms. Greenwood," he said, inclining his head, "I see you decided to pay us a visit." Sasha advanced into the office, acutely aware of the plush carpet under her worn shoes. I needed to see if this was real," she managed, holding up the envelope. "And if it is real, why?" Remy offered a faint smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Direct. I respect that." He gestured toward a chair across from his desk, then sat down again. Naomi remained by the door, tablet in hand, looking poised for any command. "The job offer is absolutely real. You might think it's excessive, but I believe in rewarding genuine kindness. Theo's well-being matters more to me than any business deal. The fact that you cared for him without knowing who he was, or who I am, mattered." Sasha lowered herself onto the leather chair. She had never met someone who spoke with such composed assurance. "So, you're giving me a role worth 6 figures? That's impossible to wrap my head around." Remy spread his palms. "I hire people who excel at what they do. You're exceptional at connecting with others, at empathizing. It's a rare skill. My corporate circles are filled with individuals who can manipulate, negotiate, or sell. But genuine empathy? That's scarce." He paused. I want to channel that quality of yours into my company's philanthropic and community outreach programs. And yes, you'll be compensated well, because that's how much I value the impact you can have. Huh. She couldn't help thinking about all the ways her life might transform if she accepted. Gone would be the days of worrying about eviction notices taped to her door. She could pay for a reliable car, finally access decent health care, even take a few night classes if she wanted. But something nagged at her. I appreciate the opportunity, she said carefully, but I can't help feeling like there's more to this. Remy glanced at Naomi, then back at Sasha. Perhaps there is, he conceded. I won't pretend I'm a simple man. I have conditions and I have expectations. For starters, I need someone loyal. If you accept this role, you'll see and hear things not meant for the press or the public. Confidentiality is paramount. I also need your willingness to engage directly with organizations that serve disabled youth. Theo's condition is personal to me, and I want to expand our philanthropic footprint. Sasha swallowed, heart thudding. And what if I fail? His gaze bore into hers with almost disconcerting intensity. Failure isn't an option here, Ms. Greenwood, he replied. But if you're worried about skill gaps or training, I'll ensure you get the support you need. Her stomach nodded with conflicting emotions. Could she handle such a leap from the diner to a corporate behemoth? And could she navigate the complexities of working for someone who dealt in power like currency? She took a quiet breath. I'll need time to think. Remy nodded. Take the rest of the day. Bring me your decision tomorrow morning. If you choose not to accept, consider the offer void. He regarded her steadily. But I sincerely hope you do accept. I think we could accomplish a lot together. Sasha rose from the chair, clinging to the envelope. Her voice felt shaky when she managed a brief thank you. She left, escorted by Naomi's unyielding presence. As she stepped into the elevator, descending floor after floor, her heart pounded with each ding. By the time she reached the lobby, she wasn't sure if her knees would hold her weight. A swirl of possibilities crowded her mind. Late that evening, her decision finally crystallized. With a trembling hand, she called Remy's number, provided in the job offer's contact information, and left a message. She accepted. The next morning, she formally quit her job at the diner, surprising Pam and the owner, who wished her well with cautious optimism. And by the end of the week, Sasha Greenwood became a new recruit at Delacroix Innovations. Her first day felt like stepping onto a different planet. Gone were the greasy counters and flickering lights of the diner. In their place stood a towering skyscraper with rows of desks manned by impeccably dressed professionals. Sasha had to adjust quickly to a swirl of meetings and presentations. To business jargon and corporate etiquette she had never needed to master before. She strove to absorb every detail, from the procedures for drafting outreach memos to the protocols surrounding private board sessions. Naomi Shepard hovered nearby, assessing her performance, pointing out pitfalls and ensuring that Sasha didn't stray off course. Even so, Sasha's empathy shone through. She could calmly diffuse tensions in a tense conference call, or strike up warm conversations with staff members who were otherwise wary of newcomers. Whenever she felt overwhelmed, she reminded herself why she was there: to help champion philanthropic endeavors for disabled youth, children like Theo. Though her contact with Theo himself was, at first, sporadic, she saw him during corporate events and sometimes in the building's private lounge, where he'd be waiting for his father after medical appointments. Each time, Theo offered a shy smile that lit up his eyes. He still remembered that fateful night in the diner. "Thanks for that grilled cheese," he'd say with a playful grin, and Sasha would chuckle, telling him that next time she'd whip up something even better. Remy observed these interactions from the periphery, guarded yet undeniably intrigued. Meanwhile, Sasha threw herself into work. She spearheaded a partnership between Delacroix Innovations and a local rehabilitation center, negotiating a funding agreement that allowed children in wheelchairs to access state-of-the-art therapy equipment. She also led a volunteer initiative for employees to mentor underprivileged teens. Step by step, she found her footing, forging relationships and building respect from peers who initially doubted her credentials. Yet the corporate landscape was not without its dangers. Whispers circulated that some executives disliked how close Sasha was becoming to Remy, suspecting favoritism or hidden agendas. The more she excelled, the more she sensed subtle hostility. It manifested in small ways: missing invitations to certain meetings, or icy stares in the hallway. She did her best to ignore it, reminding herself that negativity was a universal phenomenon in any workplace. Things came to a head when confidential financial data leaked to the press, jeopardizing a major deal Delacroix Innovations was about to close. The details pointed to someone high up in the company. Whispers started circulating that Sasha might be involved. She was new after all, and had come from out of nowhere. Soon, she found herself the focal point of suspicious glances. Even Naomi seemed to watch her with renewed vigilance. One afternoon, Sasha was summoned to Remy's office with an urgency that made her palms sweat. She stepped inside, finding him alone, standing by the massive window overlooking the city. The sky was overcast and the distant drone of traffic created a tense atmosphere. On his desk lay a stack of papers. He turned to face her, and for the first time since they'd met, Sasha saw genuine turmoil in his eyes. "Someone leaked the Delacroix financial plans," he said, voice low with controlled anger. "Our stock has already taken a hit. The board is demanding an internal investigation." He exhaled sharply. "And it's pointing in your direction, Sasha." Her chest constricted. Remy, you know me better than that. I do know you, but many on the board don't," he replied, scanning her face. "Tell me there's no chance you're involved." She squared her shoulders, refusing to tremble despite her fear. "I swear to you, I had nothing to do with this." Slowly he nodded. "All right, then let's figure out who did. Because if we don't, the board will insist on terminating you to appease shareholders." Sasha felt the sting of anger and injustice. She had clawed her way to this position, poured her heart into the job, and now a single rumor could cost her everything. Yet surprisingly, Remy's steady gaze carried reassurance. "We'll uncover the truth," he said. "Trust me." In that moment, she realized something. She did trust him, at least more than she would have ever expected to trust a billionaire with influence, carved from a lifetime of merciless deals. And so, united by a shared determination, they set out to unmask the real culprit. A hush settled over the boardroom as Remy gave Sasha a quick nod, silently urging her to continue. Meeting those skeptical gazes, she recalled her days at the diner, where a small act of kindness could transform someone's entire outlook. Stepping forward, she insisted that trust was built through humility, not just polished statements. With every word, Sasha felt a surge of pride. She was no longer just the waitress from a rundown neighborhood. She was a vital force for positive change. Her proposal was met with cautious acceptance at first, then growing support as the team grasped the potential impact. Even the board members who once eyed her with suspicion began to reconsider. By the end of the meeting, Remy spoke up, commending Sasha's bravery. That quiet moment, where shared conviction overcame doubt, showed everyone present that compassion, grounded in truth, could redefine the very core of Delacroix Innovations.